April 17, 1945. The air over Bavaria is thick with the final, desperate violence of a dying Reich. For First Lieutenant Harold Hal D. Mings of the 55th Fighter Group, 343rd Fighter Squadron, this was supposed to be a routine fighter sweep. A chance to clear the skies for the advancing Allied armies below. His mount, the magnificent P-51D Mustang, a silver dart of American engineering. But on this day, fate had a different, far more dangerous mission in store. What began as a mission to dominate the skies would become a desperate fight for survival behind enemy lines. A test of courage, ingenuity, and sheer audacity that defied every rule of aerial combat. When a pilot's P-51 was destroyed, he took theirs. This is the story of a daring escape that made history. To understand the sheer improbability of what Lieutenant Mings was about to attempt, we must first understand the man and the machine. Hal Mings was not a fresh-faced rookie. By April 1945, he was a seasoned fighter pilot, having flown numerous combat missions in the P-51. He was part of the famed 55th Fighter Group, Fightin' 55th, based at RAF Wormingford in England. Their task, long-range escort of heavy bombers deep into Germany, and aggressive fighter sweeps to destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found. His aircraft, the P-51D Mustang, was a legend. With its liquid-cooled Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and graceful, laminar-flow wings, it could outfly and outfight nearly anything the Germans put in the air at high altitude. It was a symbol of Allied air supremacy, a technological spearhead. But on the ground, it was just metal. And a pilot alone, separated from his wingmen and his machine, was profoundly vulnerable. The strategic situation in mid-April 1945 was one of collapse and chaos. Allied forces were crossing the Rhine in force. The Soviet Red Army was encircling Berlin. The German war machine was in its death throes, but it was still dangerous, a cornered animal, fighting with ferocious, localized intensity. The skies, while dominated by the Allies, were still patrolled by remnants of the Luftwaffe, and the German countryside was crawling with flak units and ground troops, all on high alert for enemy airmen. For a downed pilot, evasion and capture were the most likely outcomes. Escape back to friendly lines, especially by air, was considered nearly impossible. On that Tuesday afternoon, Lieutenant Mings was leading a flight of Mustangs on a targeted ground attack mission near the town of Eichstätt, Germany. Their objective, disrupt German logistics, target any movement on the roads and rail lines. The mission was going according to plan until the flak found its mark. It was sudden, a fellow pilot would later recount. 1 minute Hal was there, the next, his bird was trailing smoke. A burst of accurate, low-altitude 20mm anti-aircraft fire had ripped into Ming's Mustang. The Merlin engine, that masterpiece of power, began to scream in protest. Oil pressure plummeted. Temperature gauges spiked into the red. The controls grew sluggish. Mings knew immediately his aircraft was mortally wounded. He had seconds to make a decision: bail out over unknown territory, or try to put the crippled machine down. Choosing the latter, Mings skillfully dead-sticked his P-51 into a rough, belly landing in a farmer's field just outside the small village of Hofstetten. The aircraft skidded to a halt, a broken spear of aluminum and steel. Miraculously, Mings was unhurt. But he was now alone, deep in southern Germany, with the distinct sound of his crash drawing immediate attention. 68302. He could already see figures in field gray running toward his position. His training took over. Evasion protocol. He quickly grabbed his .45 caliber sidearm, his escape map, and what little rations he had. He moved away from the crash site, using the woodland for cover. For hours, he navigated by the sun, moving west, toward where he believed American lines were advancing. His training took over. Evasion protocol. He quickly grabbed his .45 caliber sidearm, his escape map, and what little rations he had. He moved away from the crash site, using the woodland for cover. For hours, he navigated by the sun, moving west, toward where he believed American lines were advancing. The landscape was alive with the signs of a retreating army, discarded equipment, scattered units moving in confusion, but still heavily armed. The net was closing. By dusk, exhausted and realizing he was trapped in a tightening cordon of German forces, Mings made a fateful decision. He would seek shelter for the night and reassess at dawn. He approached a remote farmhouse, hoping for a semblance of mercy. Little did he know, his war was about to take an inconceivable turn. As he cautiously approached the homestead, he was spotted not by a sympathetic farmer, but by a member of the local Volkssturm, the German Home Guard militia. Overwhelmed and captured, Lieutenant Mings was now a prisoner of war. His hopes of a swift evasion evaporated. He was disarmed, marched to the nearby town of Gamersheim, and placed under guard. The immediate threat of death had lessened, but the prospect of spending the remainder of the war in a POW camp now loomed. His fate seemed sealed. Mings was held overnight in a makeshift lockup. The following day, April 18, his captors decided to move him. Along with a few other captured Allied airmen, he was loaded onto a truck. Their destination, a larger interrogation center or transit camp deeper inside Germany. As the truck rumbled down the war-torn roads, Ming's mind raced. Every mile traveled east was a mile away from freedom. The opportunity for escape was slipping through his fingers with every rotation of the tires. Then, fortune, or chaos, intervened. Near the town of Lithium, the convoy came under attack. Not from Allied aircraft, but from a force that had become the scourge of German roads in the final weeks of the war, a flight of razor-winged Republic P-47 Thunderbolts on an armed reconnaissance mission. The Thunderbolt pilots, seeing German military vehicles, did not hesitate. They screamed down for a strafing run, their 8.50 caliber machine guns ripping the road apart. In the ensuing panic, the German guards dove for ditches. The truck driver was killed or fled. The prisoners, seizing the moment of utter confusion, scattered. Mings, acting on pure instinct, sprinted away from the road, not into the open fields, but toward a cluster of buildings on the horizon. He wasn't running blindly. His pilot's eyes had recognized the distinctive outlines of hangars and a long, flat field. He was running toward an airfield. Lithium Airfield. Breathless and clad in his distinctive leather A-2 flight jacket, Mings reached the perimeter of the field. What he saw was a scene of organized abandonment. Lithium was an active Luftwaffe base, but one that was clearly being dismantled. The air raid had caused panic. Mechanics and ground crew were focused on salvage or their own survival. Aircraft were dispersed around the field. And there, parked not 200 yards from him, was a sight that made his heart stop, a fully intact, seemingly operational Focke-Wulf FW-190. Not just any FW-190, but a later model A-8 or A-9, a Werger, Shrike, one of the most formidable single-engine fighters of the war, the very machine he had dueled with in the skies. The crisis of capture had transformed. Now, the crisis was one of impossible opportunity. Before him sat the keys to his freedom, but they were attached to a German warplane. He was alone, behind enemy lines, at an active enemy airbase. He had no checklist, no knowledge of the German cockpit layout, no guarantee the aircraft was even fueled or armed. One wrong move, a curious guard, a mechanic returning to his post, a failed engine start, would mean certain death. The weight of the decision was colossal. Stay and hide, hoping to eventually slip through ground lines. Or attempt the unthinkable, to steal, from the heart of the enemy, their own weapon, and fly it to freedom. Hal Mings did not hesitate. The pilot in him overruled every other instinct. This was a chance not just to escape, but to strike a final, personal blow against the enemy that had shot him down. Moving with a purposeful calm to avoid drawing attention, he walked directly to the parked Focke-Wulf. To any distant observer, he might have looked like a Luftwaffe pilot heading to his machine. He reached the aircraft, its dark green camouflage and distinctive black crosses a stark contrast to his own silver Mustang. The cockpit was a puzzle. Where was the fuel selector? The throttle? The magneto switches? The landing gear lever? The instrumentation was in German. Mings had to rely on a universal understanding of aircraft layout and pure, tactile logic. He climbed into the cockpit, the cold leather of the seat a stark reminder of the enemy pilot who normally sat there. He began methodically identifying controls. Pause, the canopy was open. He found the primer, the fuel pump. He located what he believed was the starter switch. The moment of truth had arrived. Taking a deep breath, Mings went through the sequence. Fuel on. Propeller pitch set. He activated the starter. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, the BMW 801 radial engine coughed, sputtered, and with a billow of blue smoke, roared to life. The sound was deafening, a deep, throaty growl entirely different from the Merlin's whine. It was the sound of the enemy, now under his command. He immediately began scanning for threats. Had the engine start drawn attention? He saw figures pointing, but in the post-strafing chaos, no immediate reaction came. They may have assumed it was a pilot preparing to evacuate the field. Now, the most dangerous part, the takeoff. He had never flown this aircraft. He had no idea of its stall speed, its takeoff roll, its handling characteristics. It was a high-performance fighter with a reputation for a tricky, narrow-track landing gear. Taxiing onto the runway, Mings pushed the throttle forward. The FW-190 surged ahead, its power immense. He fought the torque, kept the aircraft straight. As the airspeed built, he gently pulled back on the stick. The aircraft responded, lifting smoothly, cleanly into the air. He was flying. He retracted the landing gear, a minor victory in itself. Lieutenant Harold Mings was now alone in a stolen German fighter, somewhere over Bavaria. His next challenge, navigation and survival. He climbed, orienting himself using the sun and major landmarks. His goal was simple, fly west. Find the Allied lines. But appearing in a Focke-Wulf over American positions was a recipe for being shot down by his own side. He had to find a friendly airfield and hope they recognized his intentions before they opened fire. He stayed low, avoiding contact. For 45 tense minutes, he flew the stolen Wurger, an American pilot at the controls of a German Predator, a singular anomaly in the April sky. Spotting a large Allied airfield, later identified as either an American-held strip near Herzogenaurach or directly back to his own unit's forward operating base, Mings knew he had to act. He performed a careful, textbook landing approach. He kept his canopy open, a universal sign of non-hostility. He made sure his landing gear was down early and clearly. He touched down, the FW-190 rolling to a stop on unfamiliar tarmac. He was immediately surrounded by astonished American ground crew, their weapons drawn. Stepping out of the cockpit with his hands raised, still in his Yuzov gear, he uttered the legendary words, "Don't shoot. I'm an American." The disbelief was total. An American pilot had just delivered an enemy fighter, intact, into their hands. Lieutenant Harold Mings was safe. He had not only evaded capture, he had reversed his fortune in the most dramatic way imaginable. His stolen FW-190 was immediately seized as a valuable intelligence prize. Technicians would pore over it, examining its armament, its engine, its construction. For his incredible feat of escape and evasion, Lieutenant Mings was recommended for the Silver Star, one of the United States military's highest awards for valor in combat. The citation would honor his conspicuous gallantry and cool courage in the face of great danger. While the war in Europe had only weeks left, his story stood out as a final, brilliant act of individual initiative and daring. He had turned a moment of catastrophic loss, the destruction of his P-51, into a legendary triumph. He didn't just escape. He commandeered the very symbol of his enemy's air power and flew it home. The story of Lieutenant Harold Mings is a testament to the unyielding spirit of a fighter pilot, a man who, when faced with the end of his war, rewrote the script. It is a singular tale from the chaotic final act of the conflict in Europe, where the lines blurred and one man's audacity carved his name into history. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.